In part 2 showed how we built our user experience for our stock coding application. Now we will add the data access that I want to hide behind an interface so that I can easily change providers. Right now we're using Yahoo, but tomorrow we may decide to use Microsoft. This also lets us provide mock quotes so we don't have to be live. This must be accomplished without using Math, the Microsoft Extension Framework. And sadly, Math is not available for the phone, as reflection.emit was omitted from the Common Language Runtime for the phone. Another design goal is to have this data access occur on a background thread, as we must issue web client calls to obtain the real data for the quote objects. So we don't want to tie up the UI. The background thread will use MVVM Lite's messaging to communicate between the threads. I could have easily used native eventing, but I was using this framework anyways. We add an anonymous delegate to our view model that will accept quote DTOs as they are received from the background thread. And overall, the process looks like this. We have our UI thread, and in our view model, we're going to register this receiver from the messaging class. And it's going to receive our quote DTOs, a list of these from our background thread. And we're using this anonymous delegate to do this. The delegate will receive the quote DTOs, and these are going to be mapped into our quote models. And as the setters are called, then we're going, data binding is going to occur to our user experience, to the list view, as the quote setters are being called, because this quote model extends iNotify property changed. Now, the real lifting is being done in the background thread. And in here, we're going to have this get data method, and which is going to be called in the timer. And the model is our interface, which is going to have an implementation. In this case, is going to be the Yahoo provider, and we call the get quote method. The get quote method is going to be passed a list of symbols, and we're going to get back our quote DTOs. And this is going to be received by a completion method asynchronously. And of course, remember we're on our background thread, but we passed in the main thread's dispatcher. So we have this lambda that's going to send the list of quote DTOs back to our UI thread. So the first changes that we're going to make are to our main view model. We're going to add this stream stock info, which is going to be the data access to either Yahoo or whatever provider we have currently. And to start this up, we just new up the class right here. And this is going to also start up our retrieval engine, because the constructor is going to start the timer for our data retrieval. Most importantly, if we look down here, we're going to set up this delegate. This is the messenger class that I mentioned earlier, and it's just going to make it a little easier than doing eventing. And I just register this receiver. And this receiver is going to receive this list of quote DTOs from the background thread. And as such, when we look at this lambda, this Q is going to represent a list of quote DTOs. And then for each DTO that's in this list, we're just going to go through our list of quotes. These are the models. And then we're going to find a matching model, matching on the symbol. And we're going to assign the properties of the DTO to our model. And by doing so, of course, we're calling the setters. And in the setters, because the model is derived from iNotify property change, then our data binding occurs to our UI. I wasn't really sure what to show next here, because it's kind of a chicken and egg situation. But let's look at the data access project. And I've added this as a separate project to my solution. Because in here, I'm going to implement my interface. Remember we said we're going to abstract all the data access behind this interface called iStockInfo. The reason being we don't have MEF, and if we want to have some flexibility in changing providers, this is one solution. My iStockInfo is pretty simple. Just have two methods. One is get quote, and it's just going to take the list of symbols of the stocks we're interested in receiving information on. More importantly, it's going to, the second parameter is an action delegate. And this is going to be a callback that's going to be called whenever our asynchronous operations are done. And an action delegate is simply a method that takes a single parameter and doesn't return a value. But this is a connection back to our caller. So the caller, because all operations in Silverlight are going to be asynchronous, this will be the method that's called after our I/O is done in the case of our real provider. The first provider I have in here though is our mock quotes, and this is just so in case I do a live connection I can still provide some data. This is a technique you can also use for unit testing. And my get quote is going to just create this, I'm going to new up this list of quote DTOs, and it's going to provide some mock data. I do provide a little bit of variability here by using the random function. And then I directly call my callback and pass it this list of quote DTOs. This because this method is not asynchronous. This works in this case. Now we'll look at the real implementation, which in this case is the Yahoo quote method. In here, we're going to use the web client call, and we're going to make a RESTful call over to yahoo.com to get back the list of quotes. There is something I should explain here is that normally there's a normal Silverlight application. This wouldn't work because there is no cross-domain policy file on the Yahoo server. However, the version of Silverlight that is on the phone is the auto browser version, and so it does not have the same constraint. So the first thing we do is we create this URI, which is going to be our RESTful call, and the list of symbols are going to be passed, and these are just as a common delimited string. These parameters are going to control what is returned. And then we're going to make the call to Yahoo, and we're going to provide a completion method through a lambda. Now, this lambda in this case, I think, provides two conveniences. One, the code flows better, and number two, I have access to the order variables of the lambda. These are hoisted into the lambda, and I have access to them. And the quotes, so my quotes, my list of quotes, which is defined up here, I actually have access to right in my lambda. And then I call parse CSV. What comes back from Yahoo is a CSV file. And down here, I'm going to use some link to parse that. In this link code, the first thing I do is I split each line. And by splitting this, I'm going to create this quote record array. And for each member of the array, I'm going to assign to a corresponding property in my quote DTO. And then I'm going to take, and these are going to be returned back to the caller, which is right up here, and in my completion method, and this callback is just going to result in the quote DTOs being returned back to our caller, and this is going to occur asynchronously. So now let's look at our stream stock info class. In our constructor, we're going to set up which provider we're going to use, and in this case, I'm using Yahoo. However, we'll look later at how we can so easily change this to our mock quote provider. Then we're going to start up our timer. The timer is going to take a timer callback method. This is, in my case, I just call it get data. And this is going to execute on its own thread. I could have just as easily used dispatcher timer here. And the next parameter I'm going to pass is the dispatcher for the UI thread. So I can get back to my UI thread. And the 3000 just sets a timer to 3 seconds. Let's look at what this get data does. The get data is going to execute on a thread that was created by the timer, and it's going to be allocated from the thread pool. And it's going to be passed, this state is going to be our dispatcher. And so we assign that to the main thread. And the next thing we have to protect this list of symbols from collisions. So we just use the monitor and we lock that list of symbols. And the next thing we do is we're going to call the getQuote method of the current provider. In this case, it's Yahoo, and we're going to pass it the list of symbols that we're interested in, and the completion method that'll be called when the stocks have been retrieved. And finally, we free our monitor. Now, the get symbol info is this completion method. This is going to be called when our asynchronous method has completed, and it's going to be returned this list of quote DTOs. Because we now have the dispatcher for the main thread, we're able to then send these back to the main thread using Galasoft's MVVM-like messaging. And as I said earlier, I could have used the standard eventing, but I'm using MVVM-like, so I decided to make use of it. And this is going to result finally in the code in our main view model being called, where we set up the receiver. And these quote DTOs are going to be mapped into the quotes, and our data binding will occur. So now let's just see how easy it is to change our provider. And let's go back into our stream stock info. And again, the reason we might want to do this is that we have some mock data and we don't want to always be going live against Yahoo. So I just go into here and I change my provider. In reality, if this is a production application, I would have some kind of configuration file that would do this for me. Now, when I run the application, let's hit the build start without debugging, and we'll see what happens. The emulator starts up again, and this time we're going to be seeing Microsoft, but you see the changes. Remember, there was a random number that let these values of stock fluctuate between about 23 and 27, and that's exactly what we're seeing because we're supplying mock data. And to change this back, I just go back to my application here, and I take and change my provider, and I'm back again to using Yahoo. So we don't have MEF, but still we can do some degree of abstraction here pretty easily. So just to give us a little more understanding of this code, let's just step through with our debugger. So I'm just going to hit start debugging. The application starts up, and this time we're going to again enter Microsoft and into our symbols. Hit the add button, and the first breakpoint we're going to hit is in the get symbol method in our view model, because remember we're using commanding to fire that click handler event right into our view model. We added to the list of quotes we're going to monitor, and we also added to write it to myfile.xml. And this is using the isolated stories cache manager. So this goes into the isolated store, which is available in Silverlight on the phone, the same as in the browser. And once we add it to our list, we're eligible. Our background thread is going to now take over. And I'm just going to move this breakpoint because the timer will fire every 3 seconds and drive us crazy. Our provider is Yahoo, and we're going to call the getQuote method. And so if we hit the next breakpoint, should be in that provider. It's in the getQuote in our Yahoo quote provider. And in the getQuote, we're going to make this download string call, which is going to go off to this URI here. So we're retrieving the quotes from Microsoft. and the next breakpoint we hit should be on the download string completing, so the operation's done. We just go through and we do our parsing, and now after we do our parsing, we now have a list of quotes here which we can pass back. We have our quote DTOs, and just look here, we have one, and we've filled it in with the debugger. We've got an ask, a bid, a day high, and etc. And now this callback which we set up will be called, and the next breakpoint should be back there, and we're in the stream stock info class, and this is our callback method after we've gotten the quotes. And remember, this is on our background thread, so this is where we use our dispatcher, which we set up, and we call the send method of our messenger class. It's going to send our DTOs from our background thread back into our UI thread. And in here, this was where we had set up, this is the receiver, and we have registered this is going to receive our DTOs. We're going to step through our DTOs, and we're just going to call the setters, which will update our user interface. This takes us to the end of our third video. The last three videos have applied to Silverlight in general, whether it be on the phone or in a browser. And all of the techniques can be used, with maybe the possible exception of the input scope. And this is a phone-specific feature. I suspect, though, it may find itself in the browser version of Silverlight 2. And also, remember that this can easily be replaced with a behavior. And my next two videos are going to be more specific to the phone, though. And these are going to take us into the world of doing push notifications. I hope you've enjoyed the last three.